Normally in NAV it's required to be a super user to actually be changing security or having the security permission set, allowing you to do all kinds of changes also, including adding your own permissions. When you use Easy Security, there is an option to use an application server to actually do the publishing or other tasks that require higher level of access. We can also, with the login setup, limit a person so they only have permissions to change other users' permission, but not their own permissions. Changing permission sets does give a person the ability to actually change their own permission set, of course, and in that way give them higher permission. So if you want to use this, you typically want to use the permission sets we have that allow a person to assign permissions to any other users, maintain that, and use the application server to publish. The application server is set up as a user in NAV that will actually allow to publish the permission in here. You can use the regular job queue, and with the later versions of NAV that have changed a lot in every version. So with the latest version of Easy Security, we have added a Codeunit that you can use simply for the job scheduler task in there. This one is the latest 2017 version in here, and there is a Codeunit in Easy Security that is intended for the NAS start Codeunit in here. You need to do some configurations to make this work in here. Setup of the NAS for publishing is done from the NAV administration tool in here for service tiers. And in my system, I currently have 2 service tiers in here, one that is used for recording. You can use the one for recording, but I'll actually set up even a third service tier in here that is only going to be used for the publishing. First thing is I want to create an account that actually have access to it in here. So I would need to, in my case, I'll use a standalone, but in a typical domain setup, you will create this user in the Active Directory, of course. I'll create a new user, and I'll just call it NAV Publish in here. It's important you give it a password because else you won't be able to start the service tiers in here. And in the case of this user, since nobody is ever going to log in as that person and maybe not even know the password, you can make it not expire down here. So I now created a new user and I added it in here. The other thing, to be able to connect with a service tier, the user needs to have access in the SQL database, of course. So I will go into my database. And go ahead and create a new user in here. I'll use my Windows login I just created. And I make a member of DBOwner so it'll actually be able to run a service tier in here. So I did the initial configuration, adding the user and then adding the user to my service tier or to my database. After that, I want to add an instance in here. And I will just call this one NAV Publish. And instead of using the network service, you will not be able to use that because it will not allow to log in properly. I will use my NAV Publish, put in my domain, and put in the password. I need to do a few things before this is working in here because I need to configure a default company. And I, of course, also need to configure my NAS service down here. So I'll go ahead and edit this one. And the first thing I want to do is have my Easy Security company be the default one in here. So my NAS will log into that company in here. If I go down under the NAS, I'll go in and put in a startup Codeunit. and it will be the one I just looked at, 14,123,511, the one called NAS start Codeunit in here. And then I will go ahead and save this one in here. So I now have set up my publishing service tier. I should be able to start that fine in here. My service tier now started, and if I actually look at the event viewer, I would actually see some errors in here, because there's one thing I'm missing, and that is to assign that user the permissions to actually log in to the database. That NAV publish user in here is currently not allowed to log in, so I'll have to go to NAV. I will use the normal way we create a user from Easy Security, opening up the normal NAV screen, add the NAV publish user in here, and I can go add some initial permissions in here, and this user would of course needs to be super in all companies to be able to manage security in here. So I have now done all the things necessary for actually setting up the permissions in here. If I go to the publish screen, and on the actions tab, I can actually find something that is called NAS processing entries in here. And this one is actually where you will request things to happen in here. So I'll go in here and say I want to have a entry, and I can do certain transaction in here, like actually publishing or getting new data and things like that one in here. I can also create restore points if I wanted to. So I want to go and run this function, get new data in here. That is doing a lot of things inside Easy Security, and I'll just reset the status. Since I don't use the job queue, I'll just answer no to this, but it now puts it in with status ready in here. And as a refresh, I would see nothing is running yet, because as of me starting the service tier, it really didn't have the permissions necessary in here. So I'll go restart it again, and that will allow the NAS now to actually start running in here. So as the restart of the service tier, it now shows as in progress here when I refresh, and it will show a start date, but it will also show an end date out here when the process actually finished. You can actually make more transactions in here, and I'll make a publish happen after that one, and I'll go in here and reset the status. And again, I don't need a job queue because I use our Codeunit. And I can see now one process finished, and it now started using the other one. So in that way, you basically just request the application server to do the task for you inside NAV in here. As this process is now running, it will be publishing the new permissions, of course, out here, and I should also have gotten the new user in here because of my other tasks that I ran about getting new data in here. If you want to limit the access for people to maintain their own security, let's say Tim and myself are actually the people that maintain security in here, I can go in and set up with the login setup. I can actually restrict who can change what in here. So if I go in and add Tim, and I will also add myself in here, and I will put a checkbox in this limited access control editing in here, basically not allowing me to change myself or any other user that is being set in this list with limited access control editing in here. So if I went in and wanted to now change my own permissions, and I currently have super, but let's say I just wanted to add another group of permissions in here. it tells me you're not allowed to access this user because it has limited access control editing in here. So in that way, I can't change that. Same would actually happen if I try to change Tim, because he's also one of these IT people that maintain security in here. And you would assign only permission for the Easy Security and only the permission sets allowing the certain task in here. If you look at the permission sets delivered with Easy Security, we actually have a list of permission sets that allow people to work with logins, but not to do anything else in here. They're all under the E_ES in here, where it will allow you to maintain logins. It will allow you to maintain groups, and you can also have a super level of access in here. So in that way, if you want people that only needs to be able to do the security in here, you would need to only assign them this security for logins. In that way, they couldn't change their own permissions, but they could always change any other users' permissions, of course, in there. If you allow people to have more access than that, they can, of course, change a permission set that you have assigned to them and potentially give the same access as super. They would not be able to add super to themselves. In that way, not being able to actually gain access to security maintenance or in other ways managing other companies than the one you assigned them, but they would still be allowed to assign themselves more security inside the Easy Security company in here. But you can limit it very well in that way. They would never be able to gain access outside the Easy Security company, even if you also allow them to be an ES super user, because they can't change their own permissions any longer. But basically, the NAS allow you to just request something to happen. And if you want to run a nightly schedule where you want this task to run, you actually will use the normal job queue in NAV and put a scheduled task in. If you only wanted to be able to command the NAS to do things, you can use the Codeunit that we have in our solution.